So I have genital herpes. Hey, I have herpes. I have genital herpes. I have herpes. I've been open about the fact that I have genital herpes for a while now. I went public about it in like February, March of this year, and I have had it for just about 2 years now. I got diagnosed just after Halloween, like early November, 2 years ago. It's been a journey. I wanted to talk about it on here and kind of like align the spaces that I'm in, because my YouTube channel has been like, I haven't been sure what to do with it over the last few years. Way back in the day, some of you might remember I used to do like cooking videos when I was like excited about eating like plant-based. Then I really got into sensuality, and that's still my thing. I am a sensual guide. I help people find and connect with their sensuality. And so the irony of getting herpes, your sensuality is like one of the main things to go under that the pressure, weight, and stigma of that diagnosis. So it's given me even more fuel to do what I do. My first public post about this was on my Instagram in like February, March, so you can go read that. And then I started to post videos about it on my TikTok, which you can follow me on there if you don't already. And by now I've had like thousands of comments, like reactions, millions and millions of views, which is dumbfounding and amazing. I've been like published in media about it. Like, it's been a whirlwind, and the reception has been mostly positive, but also negative because of the stigma, which I'm gonna get to. But a lot of why I wanted to make this video was so that like I could come out about it in all the spaces that I'm in, so that I can just like help people out there feel more comfortable with it and realize it's not a big deal. You can still feel confident, you can still feel beautiful, you can still have a normal dating life, you can still have a normal sex life. I also wanted to tell my story and how I got it and the growth I've had to mark the 2 years that I've had it, and also because I've like touched on it in random videos and like lives, but I've never told my full story. So I'm gonna do that now. First, let me talk to you about like herpes facts and herpes stuff that you may not know, especially if you're someone who doesn't have it / realize they have it, or you're fairly ignorant about it, which like a lot of us are until we get it or come across it. Or if you have it and you're aware of these facts already, but it's just comforting to hear or be reminded of. So first of all, when I say herpes, I'm referring to HSV1 or HSV2, which are both herpes. I have HSV2. There are like 8 common strains of herpes, but I'm pretty sure there's like hundreds of strains or 100 strains. They theorize that like one of the early human ancestors must have consumed meat with herpes on it or in it, which, you know, way back then, I guess, is how it like got into the human. Or they copulated with another human species that carried it. It's been around forever. Of the 8 common strains, or the common strains we know about, like mono is a strain of herpes, pretty sure. Chickenpox, smallpox, shingles, and what we call cold sores. HSV1 is most typically oral, or like around the face. And that is what people commonly refer to as cold sores or fever blisters. It is herpes. HSV2 is commonly below the belt or genital area. People assume it's like genital is genital. It's all over your genitals. No. I'm sorry, someone's like, of course, vacuuming while I'm filming. That's fine. Below the belt means like you can have a flare up on your leg, you can have it on your butt, you can have it on your genitals, you can have it inside. You don't know exactly where it's appearing for someone, so don't assume. Second, HSV2 can appear orally or anywhere else on the body, but it's quite rare. HSV1 can appear genitally, and that is very common. And the reason for that is because a lot of people acquire HSV1 genitally through oral sex. Because so many people have HSV1 and don't recognize it or realize it, or just think that cold sores are not herpes, they will transfer it to someone genitally and they will have HSV1 genitally. Like, first way that people go wrong is they try to make a distinction between a good herpes and a bad herpes. They're not worrying about oral herpes because, like, whatever, you get a blister every once in a while on your mouth, who cares? That still sucks for people who get it. Sometimes it's visible. People are bullied for that anyway. It's not like oral herpes is automatically the good one, okay? Genital herpes is the same thing, just down below. So they actually used to like not even differentiate between the two strains. They started to do that when they started to recognize that it was appearing genitally as well. So they called the genital one HSV2 and the oral one HSV1. But like I said, it's extremely common to have HSV1 genitally. Of course, like, the two strains have slight differences. The same things apply to both in terms of like both can be asymptomatic and both are dormant most of the time, and there's no saying as to how it's going to be in your body. You might have flare-ups with either strain, either location, a few times a year, never, once every few years, like, it just depends. So that's like the strains, okay? What else is there to know? How common it is. So if you look up stats for HSV2, it's going to say it's like 13% of the population. It's like 1 in 6 people. They'll cite statistics for HSV2 to be like, not a lot of people have it. It's only 13%, right? That's only those diagnosed. And they think about 25% of people who have it are diagnosed because it is asymptomatic so much of the time, or just period, for so many people. They estimate that 70 to 90% of people who have herpes are not aware. So it's a lot higher than that. HSV1 is like 1 in 3 people or even higher. The percentage for the global population is 67%, but that's a stat from 5 years ago or so. And again, that's also only those diagnosed. But the point is, they are all herpes. They are both herpes. If you're going to stigmatize one strain of herpes, like genital herpes, and not the other, it doesn't make any sense, because you are just as likely, more likely, to encounter someone with oral herpes and acquire it genitally from them than somebody who has genital herpes and acquire it genitally from them. Do you know what I mean? We have to put both on a level playing field and worry about both the same way and disclose both the same way, or destigmatize both. Herpes is so extremely common. So many people have it. Most of the people in your life have it. You just don't know, or they don't know. It's not this like horrible ailment that people think it is. So the other major thing to understand about herpes is that it is not screened in your routine STD screenings. The CDC and WHO, both, if you look it up, recommend against screening for herpes, and there's a few reasons for that. One is the stigma is so great. It'll usually cause the person more distress than the virus is worth. Second reason is that in most cases where the virus is asymptomatic, if they diagnose you with it and it's asymptomatic, they find that it doesn't change behavior, so there's no point. The third reason is that the blood test that is done to diagnose HSV1 or 2 without symptoms is quite inaccurate and unreliable. What it does is it measures the level of antibodies that you have after being exposed to the virus, and then it reaches a certain level where they assume you have the virus. They can reasonably say you have HSV1 or 2, but they don't know where it's located if you've never had an outbreak before, and if and when and where it's ever going to pop up. Also, every single one of us has been exposed to herpes. I would say that probably every single one of us has herpes. It's just a matter of who shows symptoms and who discovers that they have it because symptoms arise and then they go get diagnosed. It's usually the arrival of symptoms that drives anybody to go get tested and diagnosed, or having a known exposure to someone or experiencing assault, getting pregnant, because they'll usually test you for more things when you're pregnant. Even then, they don't always for herpes, which is interesting because that's the only case where herpes can be threatening to like a newborn. For anyone that's worried about that, what they do is they typically put you on suppressive medication to ensure that a flare-up doesn't happen, because the risk is in having a flare-up while you're giving a vaginal birth, and it can be transmitted that way. So they'll usually opt for a C-section if there's any risk of a flare-up or they see a flare-up. Reason it can be dangerous to a newborn is like many things are dangerous to a newborn because they have no immune system yet. So in the same way, people like to focus on like, well, if you have genital herpes, you are at risk of transmitting it to your newborn. But if you have oral herpes, you are at risk of transmitting it to any newborn that you might kiss. You wouldn't go see a baby if you had a cold or a flu either, you know? There's a lot of things to watch out for with newborns. So that's why, unless you know that you're getting screened for HSV1 or 2, you can't reasonably ever say that you don't have herpes. And so judging someone who knows they have herpes is a very dangerous game with karma, because you could very well have it. And so that brings me to the final point about herpes itself, which is like the stigma and shame that is created around it. The stigma is the worst part. A lot of the stigma arose from abstinence-minded sex education, which was all about scaring you from engaging in sexual activity instead of equipping you with the knowledge to do it responsibly and realistically. If you want to avoid somebody that you know has an STD and that has disclosed to you, that's fine. Just be polite about it, but also be conscious of the fact that you're always risking STIs and STDs with any sexual partner you have, no matter how many you have, whether you're monogamous or not. A lot of people acquire STDs while in relationships because of a partner cheating or a partner having an STD that they had no prior knowledge of. So many people get STDs from assault or from their first partner or from a few partners. Like, body count doesn't matter. You can make the argument all you want that the increase of, partners increases your chances, fine, but like, it's not even exclusively sexually transmitted when it comes to herpes. You can have herpes because you were born with it. You can have herpes because you were kissed as a child by somebody else who had it, or like shared utensils or drinks. There's even a strain of herpes that lives on like gym mats. And I'm not even kidding you. It's a thing, and a lot of athletes get it. In abstinence-minded sex education, they also showed like the worst of the worst when it came to photos of different STDs and STIs in order to scare you away from risking it, which is so irresponsible, again, because like herpes is so incredibly common. And it's not the ailment that people think it is, because a Google image search is not a reliable way to figure out if you have herpes or what herpes looks like, because you could be looking at any strain of herpes. You could be looking at a shingles outbreak, which is more like a rash. You could be looking at an extreme case of herpes. Somebody with like autoimmune issues might have more severe outbreaks. And just like any virus or any skin condition or any ailment at all, things can obviously get out of control if there's an underlying cause to that or issue going on. But for most people, most of the time, herpes is like asymptomatic, period. Or if it's symptomatic, most people will have a mild flare-up a few times a year, if that. It's very common to have your first flare-up and then not have one ever again, or not have one for years, or to get flare-ups in the first couple years and then it slows down and stops happening, and then maybe it comes back after a few years because you're going through a stressful period in your life or your body is run down. It kind of comes out when your immune system is taxed in any way, because the virus sits dormant in your nervous system and it'll pop out onto your skin if something is going on. And it is skin-to-skin transmission. You have to engage with the viral particles or whatever on the sore. So no, you can't transmit it through blood or fluids. That is why the other thing people don't realize is you can still contract herpes with the use of condoms and protection, because if it's outside the area that the condom or barrier protects from, then it can still transmit. Obviously, transmission is highest during a flare-up. People who are having an active flare-up are generally not going to engage in any activity. There is something called viral shedding where you can shed the virus outside of a flare-up, but they don't know how often that happens, how long you shed for, if it's enough to transmit to somebody, so there's always a small risk, but the risk is highest as a flare-up is happening, active and after, and when it's healing. That's not to scare you or say that it's impossible to avoid, but it's very hard to avoid. And it's one of those things that if we just remove the stigma from it, a lot of us would be a lot calmer about the risk of it, and even acquiring it and knowing that it wasn't our fault. It's extremely common. It can happen against your best efforts. And it doesn't have to change your life, and doesn't. There's a lot of different things you can do to reduce transmission as well. Obviously, for flare-ups, there are antivirals that you can take to treat them and help them heal faster. You can also take those antivirals daily to reduce the chances of transmitting to partners on a regular basis. Being with someone with herpes doesn't mean you're absolutely going to get herpes. There are many couples where one is herpes positive and one isn't. Yes, you can still have children. You can still try for children. All of that is still totally doable. People have asked me if it affects your fertility. It does not affect your fertility at all. Oh, sorry, back to the stigma. Another major reason for the stigma is that when the antivirals came out on the market in the 70s and 80s, they actually didn't have a market, a viable market, because doctors were just identifying herpes and sending people on their way. There was no reason to treat it. It causes discomfort for a couple days, goes away, and you're fine. When this drug came out promising to help suppress flare-ups and also lower transmission and ease flare-ups when they happen, they needed to create a more hungry market for it. So they were marketing or advertising the drug and presenting herpes as something debilitating, shameful, extremely uncomfortable, et cetera, so that, people would have reason to use the drug. I have nothing against it. I think it's great that it's out there, but it's important to acknowledge how a lot of these cultural factors were then woven into our collective consciousness and our interpretation of herpes. And then it also, for some reason, has always been a punchline in media and television. And that doesn't help either, because it's the best explanation I've heard about it, and I think it was from a doctor quoted in an article, I think it was on Vice. Herpes isn't serious enough to make it a really mean thing to make fun of someone for, but it's also shameful enough because people are ashamed when they have it and hide it, that it's a good thing to make fun of, or easy thing to make fun of someone for. So it's basically just a really cheap, unimaginative, stupid punchline that makes its way into a lot of film and television and further adds to that discourse that it's this shameful, embarrassing thing that really, when you separate yourself from it and look at it objectively, it's extremely immature to make fun of somebody for an ailment like that. So there's so many movies and shows that have had horrible punchlines, and from now on, when I come across one, I'm going to write to the writers and tell them what shitty writers they are. Another big contributor to the stigma that not a lot of people know about is Time magazine had a huge article, I think it was in the 70s as well, after the sexual revolution reached its peak, called The Scarlet Letter, and it was all about how this horrible ailment was taking America by storm and was the scourge of the sexual revolution, and it was herpes. And they presented it as the consequence of these actions and something that was now rightfully going to usher in an era of sexual abstinence and responsibility. And it was after that they started to really hone in on more religious, abstinence-minded sexual education programs. Okay, in terms of flare-ups themselves, which I want to touch on because there's so much misinformation about what they're actually like and what they look like, they can very easily be mistaken for other common ailments. People think that you are covered in blisters all the time, but like I said, it's asymptomatic most of the time. The most like typical sort of telltale signs are a blister or more, or like a small cluster of bumps or blisters. You can certainly have more of a rash, especially your first outbreak, but subsequent outbreaks, like I said, tend to be a lot milder. You can have like cold and flu-like symptoms at the onset of your first outbreak when your body has first acquired the virus because it's trying to fight it off, but a lot of people never have that. It can look like a razor bump, it can look like an ingrown hair or a pimple. It can even look like a paper cut. So if you're in doubt and you think what you're experiencing is a herpes outbreak, the best thing to do is not to look at Google or image search, but like just go to your doctor, because the most definitive way that they can identify and diagnose herpes is through a visual diagnosis, because they know what to look for, or they'll swab it and be able to confirm whether it's herpes for you and the type especially. It's funny because I've been like preparing to talk about this for a long time on here, and it's like hard. Like it's a whole new ball game to talk about it on here. I love that this is like a space where I can make a longer format video about this stuff and maybe go live in the future and like do more videos on this topic here. But okay, my story now. Here we go. Okay, so for most of my life, for all of my life, I was always very careful and health conscious, always had health anxiety, always worried about different health ailments that could be going on. I actually had shingles in university, and it was over a year where I was like pulling consistent all-nighters. I was extremely stressed. I was terrified it was herpes, but it was like along my waist, which is like a very common area when you get a shingles outbreak. It like follows like a branch of nerves. So you can either have it like along your face or your waist. If you look at like how your nerves are laid out in your body, it gives you an idea. So my doctor was like, this is for sure shingles. Like, it's not common to get shingles young, but it can come up when you have like very intense periods of stress. That is basically, I believe, the chickenpox or smallpox, I always mix up the two, virus that has sat dormant in your body since acquiring it when we were young, or having it when we were young, coming up again. And usually it comes up in elderly people, but I'm pretty certain they now have a shingles vaccine, and most people who are born after the era of smallpox and chickenpox have had the vaccine for those. So, but most of us before a certain year carry the shingles virus, or like the smallpox / chickenpox virus that will come out as shingles at some point later in life. So that's an interesting little thing. Whew, okay. I always I was always aware of herpes, but I don't remember any like sexual education classes or learning about it. I do remember seeing pictures of it and thinking it looked terrifying. And I remember jokes all the time making fun of people for either having cold sores, which we didn't identify as the same thing, or just like it being a disparaging comment like, oh, that person must have herpes. I bet that person has herpes. Oh, ew, like you have herpes. You probably have herpes. Like, I remember jokes like that. The thing that's funny as well is that at some point in high school, I believe I did a project on herpes, or like wrote an essay on herpes or something. And I don't remember why or for what. I remember doing like the bulletin presentation thing. I probably even had like pictures on it. I probably contributed to the stigma myself. But I remember learning about the two strains and learning that they're like oral and genital herpes like was the same thing, and that you could easily contract genital herpes from oral herpes. And I remember like telling a friend or friends about it and being like, it's terrifying. Like, it is so easy to get and it is so common. And I remember just being like, I'm going to block this out of my mind and I'm never going to think about it again because I'm a careful, good girl and I'm never going to get it. Karma showed me. So like I said, I was always like very health conscious and had a lot of health anxiety. I still do. Contrary to what people on my TikTok like to say, they like to slut shame me and tell me that the whole NBA team has run through me, which like, bring it on. It's just like the misogyny is palpable. The moment you are out about something as a woman, the amount of boys that will drag you for that when like you're the one being open and honest, and they're more likely to get it from people who aren't aware that they have it or who aren't open and honest about it, and they very likely have it themselves. They love to blame me for getting it and like drag my sensual and sexual expression as a woman for the reason why I ended up with it, which doesn't even make cognitive sense. Like one of the really common comments I get is like, it's because you dress and act this way that you got it, which like, if I knew that having good style and being hot was going to get me herpes, like, okay. So I had a handful of partners throughout my life, never had a one-night stand. Before I got herpes, never had casual sex. I only ever slept with people I was dating. Okay, wait, I shouldn't say never, but like I did not have like my heyday in my 20s where I hooked up with lots of people because I was always in a relationship. Like I was like with my high school boyfriend / like high school sweetheart through all of high school and the beginning of college. Then I met my college boyfriend. I think I had 2 shorter term boyfriends or partners I dated before that. But when I met my college love, we got married and I was with him for 13 years total. We were married for about 8 years. So I was not playing the field, okay? And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with having a high body count or sleeping with many partners. It's about how you approach those things and what kind of precautions you take and what kind of partner you are, not about how many people. It's just funny to me because of the assumptions that these triggered little boys make about me when they know absolutely nothing about me. And I don't even care to defend myself about it because, again, I think there's nothing wrong with being a hoe. I wish I was more of a hoe. So when I separated with my husband, we decided to separate. We got a divorce. I met somebody through the end of that and after, because we had an open relationship towards the end of our marriage, that I then moved into a relationship with this new person, okay? And for a while it wasn't exclusive, but I was not seeing anybody else because I had just come out of a marriage. This was already a lot for me. And I was in love with this person. I thought I met my next soulmate. And we were long distance for the majority of our relationship. Long distance and not exclusive. They had a partner that I understood was kind of a casual open thing, but it was very confusing. There was a time where it seemed there was some lack of honesty going on. I basically ignored a lot of red flags because I was smitten. I was very blind. My worth was extremely low. And I thought I had met my person when in reality I had energetically matched with somebody who was gonna almost destroy my life. And instead of recognizing that, what's a YouTube video without some tears, right? That's why this is a lot for me to talk about. I have processed and deconstructed this a lot, but it still triggers me when I talk about it. Okay, so despite my better knowing, I decided to move to where this person was living and see, like, give the relationship a chance. Like, the idea was to live there for a few months and see what would happen. I feel like I also just needed to get away from like everything I had been through. My marriage with my ex-husband was fantastic. We had just been through a lot in our marriage. I had become pregnant after like almost 2 years of trying with twins, unexpectedly, like no treatments or anything, just like twins came out of nowhere. And he and I had both always wanted twins, so it felt like such an aligned, amazing thing. And then I miscarried. Okay. It's okay, now I have a dewy complexion. Okay, so I miscarried, which was really hard on us. I was depressed for a while. I didn't realize it. And then I went through a very intense depression, I think for like 3 or 4 months, where it was like, it got really dark. And that was about a year after. So it just like, it didn't make sense to me that something so aligned and seemingly miraculous came along and then got like, poof, taken away. But it's extremely common to miscarry as well. So that really gutted me. And then there was a period of time after that where I just started to question whether I wanted to have children at all. And then I started to question, like, you know, whether I was happy. And we get along so well. We have such a good foundational friendship that I just felt like we were better off that way and weren't meant to be in a romantic relationship anymore. And that's like essentially the conclusion that I had come to. And I'm just so lucky that we're good. Me and this new partner gave our relationship a try afterwards. Like I said, we were long distance, non-exclusive, and then at some point we became exclusive. Again, lots of things were going on that were very questionable, very much red flags that I continue to ignore because especially by the time that I had invested myself in seeing this relationship through and eventually going there to stay for a few months, I like couldn't let it go. And so like anything that threatened that came up that was like, this person may not be who you think they are or like good for you. I was just like, I would explain it away, you know? So it was during one of our visits, like me visiting them, that I started to develop symptoms. And it was towards the end of the visit. And then I was like driving home across the border and I was in a great deal of pain. And I thought that I had just like a razor bump when it first came up. I didn't think much of it. I thought maybe afterwards I was like just irritated from like intimacy. You know, as I was driving home, I was in such a great deal of pain that I was like, I must have a UTI. Or just like, I thought it was like the friction from wearing jeans. I was like, why did I wear jeans on this drive? Like I'm, you know, this razor bump is like hurting like hell. Like that's what I thought was happening. So after I got home, I like looked at it and the thing that alerted me was it looked like a blister. Like it didn't look like a normal razor bump. And that really freaked me out. So I went to my doctor. My doctor looked at it and said it was fine. She literally looked at it and was like, I think it's fine. I don't think it's herpes. Because that was what was running through my head. I was already like in shambles and tears. And she was like, I think it's fine. It just looks like razor burn to me or like a razor bump. And she sent me home. And she was like, if it doesn't go away, come back or if it gets worse. I think that at that time, I just hadn't developed any additional sores yet. But she called me the next day. And I remember being like, okay, phew, I'm in the clear, but I was still worried about it. She called me the next day and was like, I think you may have herpes. And I was like, what? Like I felt so betrayed and angry at her because I was like, you just gave me a clean bill of health, even though she didn't test me or anything. And then she was like, I'm actually glad she called me because she was like, I think it might be herpes. I'm just going to like assign you or prescribe you the drug. Just take it because it can't hurt if it's not. And if it is, like, it'll help clear it up. I was like, what do you mean? Like, how are we not confirming this? Like, I just take the drug? Like, we don't know that it's herpes. Like, I was so shell-shocked. I had a loved one who knew everything all along, help me set up an appointment at like a clinic. So I went to like a sexual health clinic or like a women's health clinic. And I think by the time I got there, it was clear I had a couple sores, and like one was like near my opening, which is why I was in so much pain and thought I had a UTI. That's where like people say like you can have pain while urinating or like burning sensations, because like any open skin where you're peeing is gonna fucking hurt. Like that's what it is, you know? The other thing I want to say actually about photos is like if I took a close-up photo of like a zit right now and uploaded it online and said it was herpes, it would look like herpes. Like any skin ailment up close is not gonna look enticing, especially when it's on your genital area. But even if I just took a random ass photo of my genitals and didn't pose myself nicely, or it wasn't in a sexual context, it wouldn't look great either. Just gonna put that out there. I mean, it can help to see what a blister looks like up close, but I just mean like those scary photos you're used to, like don't. Once I was in the clinic, I was like spread eagle on the table. A doctor and like her nurse were looking at me, or a nurse were looking at me, and she was like, the doctor was like, you have genital herpes. Like I can see like there's like 3 or 4 sores. We're gonna swab you, but like I'm positive. And I was just like devastated. And she took a swab and then left the room to like prescribe me my medication, which I already had prescribed. I just hadn't filled it yet. But this one I was going to fill because I was like, okay. You know, it was to treat the flare-up mainly. And they just like gave me a pamphlet. And I was like bawling. Like I was inconsolable. I just remember the nurse was like, why are you so upset? And I was so irritated at that question. I was just like, what do you mean? Like, you just told me I have genital herpes. Like my love life is over. My dating life is over. Like, my boyfriend's gonna leave me. Like my first thought, this tells you a lot, but my first thought wasn't like, oh shit, did I get it from my partner? It was, did I have this and expose my partner because I had the flare-up starting during our visit, and is he now gonna leave me? That was my first thought. That just says so much. And so she could tell I was like really upset with her question when she was like, why are you so upset? And she was just like, it's super common. It's super common. Like we see this all the time. So I was like, okay, I hate you. But now looking back, like I understand, because to them, it's not a big deal. And they're not equipped to like counsel. I did proceed to go home and like research things for days. First thing I did was call my partner at the time, crying, telling him that, you know, I just got diagnosed with herpes, and like waiting to hear him say like, oh my God, like it's over, right? And he was like really supportive. So I was like, wow, okay, this is my person. He's so good about it. After I was like driving home, I pulled over on the side of the road and I called like a sexual health helpline. I think it was like specifically a sexual health helpline for my city for people who've been diagnosed with an STI or STD. So like that is a great resource if you need one. And the person I spoke to on the phone was so helpful. And like my first question was like, you know, am I ever going to have a normal sex life again? Am I ever going to date anyone again? Like, is anyone ever going to go down on me again? Like those were my questions. And she was amazing and like eased my worries right away and recommended a book to me and was like, everything's going to be fine. It's extremely common. It's like totally manageable. I just felt like I had like crashed and hit rock bottom. Like my marriage had ended. Like I was deciding to be alone. I decided to date this random person. I was going to go live with this person for a few months. Like now I got herpes. Like, what am I doing? What am I doing? You know? And I felt like I was being punished by the universe for like making these life-changing decisions. And I remember just sitting in a tub that night, crying to myself. Like I was having very dark thoughts. Just thoughts like it wasn't worth living with this. Like, life was going to be so much harder now. This was so incredibly embarrassing. How would I ever face anyone again? I just heard this, like, I've said it before in some of my other videos, but I just like heard this voice inside of me that was like, you're going to be public about this. Like, you're going to tell people about this online and help people get through this. And like, it's supposed to be this way. And you're going to find power in this. And I was just like, shut the fuck up. Let me be depressed in my bathtub. I don't need to listen to you right now. But I knew it. It was like an inner knowing that I had. And that was actually making me cry too, because I was like, what the fuck? I can never do that. I am never going to do that. Like, you're crazy, you know? Whether that was my higher self talking or like a guide or a force, like I believe in that stuff. So a few weeks later, that same partner told me that they were now having an outbreak. And so my worry was that I gave it to them. And it was a very ambiguous thing. Like, they were like, I'm not upset about it. I'm not blaming you. I could have very well given it to you. Like, it was open like that. Like, it was like, we don't know where it came from. Let's just not dwell on it, you know? And that was kind of the thing that set me off, or like was a flag for me. That's one thing that they told me on the sexual health helpline was like, don't waste too much time and energy trying to figure out like who you got it from and how, because that can just bring you so much distress, and it can be so hard to know because it can lay dormant. But this felt like a first infection because like I had flu symptoms, like it kind of all came after. So I felt like a mess. And I also felt like I can't deal with this if this is what outbreaks are like. But I remember reading that your flare-ups are like so much more mild and less frequent after the first one. So all that to say, like, I truly believe that was like my first, my body's first time acquiring the virus, and that it was from that partner. Now, yeah, like whenever it came to discussing their sexual history or how they could have stumbled on it, and the thing is, like, we had that talk before. They seemed very transparent and open with me. And by the time that we were, you know, exclusive and like together, we weren't always using protection, you know, and I'm fine to admit that. You can still get it with protection. But I trusted this person. There were many, many flags I had ignored, and there was no reason to trust them. If anything, it was the opposite. So once, you know, it was clear they had it, I actually felt some comfort in that, because I was like, okay, we both at least have it. We don't have to worry. And I'm going to be honest, that's part of the reason I stuck with that relationship deep down, even though I also did truly think I loved them and wanted to be with them. But like, I was just like, I can't imagine going out into the dating world with this. And like, it was like kind of a trauma bond. Like, they have it too. I don't have to worry with them. Even if they gave it to me, like maybe it was an accident. So like, I went ahead with my couple months visit, and that turned into 7 months that I was living with them, because it was around the time the pandemic hit, and like I felt safer staying. And I was also just so brainwashed. Like, this was a manipulative, narcissistic person who was constantly lying. I found this out later. I thought I was in love. I thought I was going to like marry this person towards the end of my stay. It started being about like, okay, how can I stay for good? Because my biggest fear was going back home, having like the 6 months of separation after spending 6 months there, because you can't just like go back and forth after that long, and them cheating on me. That was my biggest fear all the time. And through the entirety of that relationship, I lost so much weight because I couldn't eat well ever. I was extremely anxious. I was always feeling so much. Like, once I was living with them, there were so many things that were questionable, and they always had an explanation. But I fucking knew, man. I knew. I just didn't like know yet. But I knew, and I felt it with every fiber of my being. And my body was like crying to me to pay attention, crying. And I was having like more frequent flare-ups at that time because I was stressed. I was going to leave like animals that my ex and I shared with my ex. Like, I left my business here, like I was working remotely on it. but I was considering leaving that job. I left like, you know, all my family and friends. Like it was like a classic like narcissistic kind of relationship where you get so addicted to and anxiously attached to the person. They feel like your only source of comfort and you are willing to isolate yourself from every part of your life. And my big thing once there was like focusing on like, I'm going to rebuild here. I'm going to make new friends. I'm going to maintain friendships with my friends back home somehow. Like once I get my proper papers, like I'll be traveling back and forth. I'll bring my animals. My ex and I had a dog and a cat, and the cat was going to stay with me. So I was like, I'm eventually going to come back for my cat and bring him over. And like, I was delusional. I was so delusional. And so the culmination or the ending of that story is that 7 months in, I was about to commit to starting a process with lawyers to like stay and work on getting like my visa. And I had this like, I couldn't decide between 2 law firms. I couldn't afford that shit anyway, but I was like trying to decide between 2 law firms to go with to start that process. And they went out that night and I was going to be like, okay, they're going to come back. We're going to celebrate with a bottle of champagne because I'll have chosen the law firm and started that process. And like, eventually we're going to get married. Is this like this is being a Pisces. This is like beware, okay? I had this voice once again that was like, check their fucking shit. Check it right now. Be 100% positive that you are safe in this relationship because you have not felt safe this whole entire time. There have always been question marks. And sure enough, luckily I had access to their laptop. I knew the password because it was my fucking name. Everything was open and I discovered everything I needed to know. And that was essentially that they had been like lying to me and cheating on me through the entirety of our relationship, the whole thing. Being so reckless, so disrespectful, putting me in danger in so many ways I was not aware of. Yeah, so I did my investigative work, started packing, rented a car, left the next morning, came back home, went through a whirlwind of fucking processing and trying to heal from that relationship.
I think that my gut felt that something was off the whole time and it was right. And like, I kept worrying about that I would have this revelation eventually that my gut was right. And I'm trying to fight against the feelings and fears that I'm now like alone in my 30s and like with herpes. And
I won't know if they knew they had herpes or not. When I listen to myself from an objective standpoint, I'm like, girl, why are you questioning it? But it has been an unintentional gift to me to deal with something that is so shamed and so stigmatized. I thought being a sensual guide was going to be a controversial thing, but being a sensual guide with herpes who helps people overcome their shame around herpes through sensuality, that's my true calling. So that's my story. I'm very active on my TikTok. I'm active on my Instagram. You can connect with me on there. My website has different ways that you can connect with me and work with me. I already do offer sessions to help accept your herpes. I call it your love rash, by the way. And I'm also introducing support calls, and I'm working on a guide, like a downloadable PDF guide that you'll be able to purchase to help you with a lot of the tools and things I, used to accept my herpes and own it and find confidence with it and date with it and have the same sex life I've always wanted to have with it. So it does not stop you from that. It is all stigma. There are enlightened, amazing, honest, educated people out there. So thank you for sitting through this and listening to my story. It was definitely vulnerable for me to tell. And yeah, I have herpes. Hello.